Hi everybody, today we're going to look at the structures found on a human brain. So right here, looking at the brain sideways, you can see the cerebrum very clearly, and you can also see the cerebellum on the posterior aspect of the brain. So let's identify some lobes first. So if you guys recall, the name of the lobes come from the bones on the skull. So right here you have the frontal lobe. The top you have the parietal lobe, the back you have the occipital lobe, and then on the side you have the temporal lobe. And again, if I go ahead and remove this, you have additional folds underneath that, and these folds are identified as insula. Now taking a look at some of the other features of the brain before we actually take a look inside, and you have this line right here that is separating the frontal from the parietal. The line, if you guys recall, is called the central sulcus. Area immediately in front of the line, so this area right here would be precentral gyrus, which is part of the frontal lobe. And the area right behind this, this would be called the postcentral gyrus. So the central sulcus is the separation line for that. Now again, if you're looking at the brain, you can clearly say your brain is made up of two hemispheres. The line that is separating these two hemispheres is referred to as the longitudinal fissure. You also have a sulcus, or a separation line, right here on the side of the brain that is called the lateral sulcus. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what we have inside. So right here again, this would be your cerebrum, right? So frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and if I turn it around, you will also see your temporal lobe. Now this structure you see right here in a lighter shade of white, and this area is referred to as the corpus callosum, which is going to be the bridge between your left and right hemisphere. This area or cavity you see is part of what we identify as ventricles, where you have your cerebral spinal fluid flowing inside. This is part of the lateral ventricle. You have this area right here called the fornix, and the area that has that kind of light shade of pink to it called the choroid plexus. Choroid plexus is the area that's really rich in blood vessels and is essential in terms of formation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Going right below that, this oval-shaped structure right here is your thalamus. The little triangle underneath it is your hypothalamus. And this little circle you see right here is called the mammillary body. Now going right here, you can see this extension right here. That's your optic nerve. Basically your eye would be right here, and the optic nerve would run here, and this is basically part of it, you can see. Now the optic nerve would be crisscrossing at this area right here called the optic chiasm. If you can imagine, remember the whole concept of contralateral again. When you have the right eye basically sending the message to the left occipital lobe and vice versa. So where these signals are crisscrossing, if I put the two halves of the brain together, see this is your optic nerve right here, and see there are crisscrossing right here. So that point of X right here, that point of connection right at the center, that's your optic chiasm or optic chiasma. Now going further, you have your brain stem. So here is the brain stem as a whole. You have your midbrain. You have your pons. Remember, pons always kind of bulging out. And continuation of that would be the medulla oblongata. Right here, you have this little hole right here called the pineal body or pineal gland, which is essential in terms of releasing melatonin for the sleep and wake cycle. And below that, you should see two little structures together. These two little structures right here, 1, 2, they're called corpora quadrigemina together. But the top one is called superior colliculi, and the bottom one is called the inferior colliculi, or colliculus, I should say. This one is essential for visual reflexes, and this one is essential for auditory reflexes. You also should see this kind of opening or channel right here. That is your cerebral aqueduct, which is where your CSF or your cerebrospinal fluid continues to flow. And then an opening right here, this opening right here, which forms this triangle right here, that's your fourth ventricle, which is basically, again, where you find your CSF flowing. Now, if you're looking at your cerebellum, which is this structure again in the back, you have patterns on the surface of the cerebellum. These are called folia, like basically folds. You can also visualize the white matter of the cerebellum. This is called the arbor vitae, which is basically these three branches you can see on the picture. Looking underneath the brain, you can also observe this extension right here. This is connected to your sense of a smell. So your nose basically would be right here, and this is the structure that will be collecting that sense. So that's called your olfactory nerve, which is also known as your cranial nerve number 1. An optic nerve would be your nerve number 2, or cranial nerve number 2. Okay, I believe that is all you guys need to know. So we will continue with our spinal cord for our next part.